Het-Heru, this is Kasank Ma Keperu for Project Illuminated, and today I want to talk to you about how the Bible is an evil book. Now, I mean that literally. I'm not just saying that to get views or as just part of being controversial. But what I'm trying to communicate is that if you read the Bible in terms of what it's preaching or conveying, is some of the most primitive, infantile ideas of right and wrong, and more importantly, and even worse, a very warped view of what God is. So let's take this back further into ancient history. You should know that the Bible is basically a plagiarized version of the ancient Egyptian Kemetic religion of Osiris Report. The Bible is based on astrotheology. Big surprise, big shock for those Christians who are not into astrology. Yes, you're reading a book that is based on astrology. It's based on astrotheology, more specifically the study of the lunar and solar cults. And it has a lot of metaphors, a lot of allegories, and it's embedded in layers, and is not meant to be read or taken literally, as some Christian theologians want to tell you that it's a history book. That's a darn lie. It's not a history book because those characters never existed. And we notice if we go back and study the ancient religion of Osiris Set, we understand, and more importantly, and study how the ancient Kemetic people wrote their culture, what they were about. And if you understand anything about the linguistics of the time, you'll know that they wrote in pungs, meaning that they took a word that had several different meanings to it. So their stories conveyed multiple layers of meanings. And you'll see it in the Bible when it talks about characters walking on water, turning water into wine, and things of that nature. It's not meant to be literal interpretations, but because the Illuminati, which is the organization that put forth the Bible, the version we know today, which is the King James versions, they did that in order to pacify our civilization, pacify our people, in order to enact their goal of global domination. Which is why you'll see a lot of churches everywhere. These churches are getting tax breaks. The ministers are becoming very wealthy. This is all in a concerted effort to basically imprison the planet in left brain thinking. So what do I mean by left brain thinking? Left brain thinking tends to see things from the surface. It tends to separate, segregate things, and doesn't see the connection between things. The ancient Kemetic people never thought that way. They always thought from a whole brain perspective or a right brain perspective, where they brought connections into things. So again, since the Bible was based on astrotheology, which is the study of the stars and everything, you need to understand that the characters in the Bible are based on the zodiac and the progression of the zodiac. And these things are very evident if you do your research. But most Christian ministers don't have the intellectual capacity to really look deeper and start to study the history of the Bible, because in their mind, the Bible is all you need, and the Bible validates itself. I've never heard of a book validating itself, so it's kind of like an insane mentality, you know. And it was the philosopher Kierkegaard who said that in order for you to understand God, you must take a leap of faith. It means you must believe blindly. Now, this philosopher is out of his damn mind, but, of course, Western society, they uplift Greek philosophy and these philosophers who didn't know what they're talking about. In order to understand God, God has to be based on the same principles that governs man and woman. It has to be based on the same principles that govern the universe. There is no leap of faith that you need to take in order to understand God. It's all there in the universe if we look, as above, so below. So we need to get out of this notion. And that, again, was put forth by the Illuminati. If you don't believe me, do your research. You'll see that many of the history books are devoid of the real occult ancient wisdom of the African shaman. They really basically whitewashed all of that out. and left you with a very sterilized left brain interpretation to where, the pharaohs went to war, they consulted their military generals before going to war. But what you don't get in the history books of how before they went to war, they consulted the priests and priestesses, they consulted the oracles, to find out what time, date was best to go to war, and so forth. Because these occult powers and these things were so powerful, the Illuminati knew that if it got in the hands of the common everyday layman, that it could cause an instant revolution, which is why today's Christian religions proselytize the idea that if you are into tarot, if you are into meditation, it's evil and of the devil. But again, these are people who are very simple-minded, ignorant in their perspective, and refuse to do the study and the history. Because if you did, you know that the King James Version of the Bible, authorized by King James, who was what? He loved little children, little kids, boys. Who's a pedophile. But that somehow escapes everybody's sphere of awareness, especially Christians when they're talking about their religion. They don't want to get into that and discuss that, And the whole idea is what you have to keep in mind, that bar none, Christianity has caused the most wars on the planet. Every president that's come into office has to vow that he's a Christian, and the first thing he does is he launches a war against a third world country, Wow, interesting, isn't that? So the bloodshed, and we're talking all the way from the Crusades to the witch hunts to everything you could think of, was orchestrated, instituted by Christians. Now, I'm not here to attack one group and put another above that, because the Muslims have their own thing, and they have to take accountability for what they did in the slave trade and things of that nature. But what I'm trying to tell you is that, going back to the Bible, when you read the Bible and its notions of doing right, and if you do right, God will reward you, is a very primitive idea. That's like treating you like a child. To get you to do right, you have to be rewarded. Or if you don't do right, you face fire and brimstone, God's wrath. What kind of God is that doesn't respect you as a divine being, that has to force you to do something right? It is so off the Bible in terms of what it preaches, that no wonder the planet is in the situation it's in today. Because again, the Bible is based on left brain thinking, which is the source of the problems in the world, because left brain thinking is based on Hegelianism. If you know anything about the Hegelian dialectic, that means that it takes, one side of the problem, then another side of the problem, and in between is the truth. And that's total BS. That's not how you arrive at the truth. I think it's the thesis and antithesis, and somewhere in the middle you have the truth. But we know from our ancient Kemetic ancestors that truth was governed by the goddess Ma'at. Ma'at was the law. She was the basis of where you got the Ten Commandments from, but it was called the 42 Negative Confessions. And the law cannot be applied to everyone. You understand? There has to be a measure. And to measure that and to know how it applies, you have to bring in her mate or her husband, Tehuti, god of wisdom, who is the measure of the law. Wisdom seeks to understand a higher truth, meaning Tehuti knows what lies in the hearts of men and women. He understands the contextual situations that bring about someone's actions, and then he can make a judgment from there, and then the law will then apply if necessary to that individual. We know, like the Ten Commandments says, thou shalt not kill, but we know that there are times, especially in defending your family or defending yourself, that you must kill. So let's get out of this primitive notion of the Bible, of these dogmatic rules and ideas that must be applied equally to everybody, because it's just total BS. And this is why I go back to saying that the Bible is an evil document, because it endorses slavery, endorses sexism, endorses racism, and it has its view of a God that is jealous, can get angry, and will strike down anybody if you don't do what this God tells you to do. And that's not who God really is. God is divine. God is above human emotions and frailties. So that's really all I have to say about this. There's so much more I can go into this, but I think you get my point. This is Kasak Maya Keperu for Project Illuminated, and that's all for now.